In today's video, I'm going to be covering the 4 subclasses for the Psion class released in the latest Unearthed Arcana by Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So the 4 subclasses are the Metamorph, the Psi Warper, the Psykinetic, and the Telepath. Now, all 4 of these classes, again, are for the Psion core class, which I have done the previous video on, but if you want to check that out, I'll put a link up there. One quick thing before we start. As of the time I'm recording this, I am at 389 subscribers. My current goal is to hit 500, so if you like the content that you see, if giving the video a like or subscribing or leaving a comment would help me out a lot, so thanks. All right, moving on to this video, here's our agenda. I'm going to cover in order the Metamorph, the Psi Warper, the Psykinetic, the Telepath, and then kind of summarize. And the next video in this series is going to be on the remaining things in this UA, so the wild talent feats and the updated spells. So when I'm evaluating these 4 subclasses, here's the main things I'm going to be looking at. Just first of all, power level and balance, both between the different subclasses and overall. I'm going to look at the thematics of the subclass. How well do they play to their particular fantasy? Are they distinct? I'm going to look at the complexity of each one. Are they fun? And kind of talk about how their features synergize with the core Psion class itself. So, jumping off into, first up is the Metamorph. So the text for this one says, our mastery of psionic powers turns inward. Our own flesh becomes like clay to us, and you mold it to turn it into the perfect vessel of your psionic powers. Experience in manipulating your life energy also enables you to adjust the life forces of friends and foes alike. So thematically, this subclass is supposed to kind of be the mind over matter subclass, and is kind of basically like empowered body horror. And I kind of hate it, but I also love it at the same time. This is also supposed to be the Gish or Spell Swords subclass in a way. It is going to get some kind of martial abilities, although I think really its niche is actually going to be in its support and teamwork abilities, and the kind of Gish stuff is going to fall into kind of a more secondary role, especially given the core class is rather squishy. So let's go ahead and jump into what the features the Metamorph subclass gives us. So first up is their spell list. So all of the subclasses have a spell list, so you get all these spells prepared whenever you hit this particular Psion level. So the spells that the Psion gets at Psion level 3, they get Alter Self, Cure Wounds, Inflict Wounds, and Lesser Restoration. At level 5, they get Aura of Vitality and Haste. At level 7, they get Polymorph and Stone Skin. At level 9, they get Contagion and Mass Cure Wounds. Now, of all 10 of these spells, only one of these is also on the core class list, and I've highlighted that. That's Polymorph. The rest of them are unique. Now, in terms of the spells that are on this list, I would say Cure Wounds, Aura of Vitality, and Mass Cure Wounds are probably the standouts. Haste is an okay spell. Stone Skin is also an okay spell. Lesser Restoration is more of a situational spell, so having it always prepared is nice. But as you can see, kind of one of the niches of this subclass is they actually have a decent amount of healing abilities, which is not something you normally get with a spell list like the Psions that is more like a wizard's for the most part. Next up at level 3 is their core feature called Organic Weapons, which lets us turn our flesh into a variety of nasty weapons. Importantly, whenever we take the attack action or make an opportunity attack, we can form one of our free hands into one of the following weapons: a Bone Blade, a Flesh Maul, or a Viscera Launcher, and it immediately returns to its previous form after our organic weapon hits or misses its target. Now, the reason I've highlighted these here, this subclass eventually is going to get an extra attack feature, and the way this is worded has some problems with it. So basically, you only get the weapon when you take the attack action, not when you make an attack as part of the attack action, and then the weapon goes away immediately after that first swing. So if you have more than one attack, you can only make one of them with your organic weapons, the way this is currently worded. So I think this probably definitely needs an update to make it say that whenever you make an attack as part of the attack action, or make an opportunity attack, you can reform your free hand, so that way you can potentially use multiple different organic weapons between attacks, and it will work well with extra attack. But moving on, when we attack with the weapon, we can use our intelligence for our attack and damage rolls instead of strength or dex, and we can make it deal psychic damage or its normal damage type, which is nice. The 3 different weapons. So the Bone Blade is a simple melee weapon that has the finesse property. I don't see any reason why it needs the finesse property other than a potential multi-class with, say, Rogue to synergize with Sneak Attack. And it deals 1d8 piercing on a hit and basically has pack tactics, so we have advantage on the attack roll if we have an ally within 5 feet. Next up is the Flesh Maul, which does a D10 damage, bludgeoning, and if a creature hit by the Maul has disadvantage on the next Strength or Constitution save they make before the start of their next turn. Now this is more probably of a teamwork option. The Psion doesn't really have spells that target those saving throws for the most part, but that said, if you hit a spellcaster who's concentrating on a spell, they'll have disadvantage on their save to maintain that spell because this weapon gives disadvantage on Constitution saves. And next we have the very visceral and disgusting Visceral Launcher that forms our hand and forearm into a crossbow made of muscle and sinew that fires bolts of bile. So the range in this is relatively short with a normal range of 30 feet and a long range of 90, and it does 1d6 acid damage. However, the first time you hit with it each turn, you can deal an extra 2d6 acid damage, and 2d6 as a ranged option is pretty darn good, and it's better than most base weapons in the game if it's only one attack per turn. I think of these three, the Visceral Launcher is actually probably going to make the most sense in terms of how this subclass optimally wants to play, but the other ones are going to work fine. Also, with that whole thing with the extra attack, as currently worded, once we get to level 6, we may want to be using a weapon and have a free hand, and I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get there. And also at level 3 here, we get a feature called Extend Limbs. So this is a transformation ability, not related to anything else. It's another way to spend psionic energy dice. So we spend our die, and for the next minute, our reach and our speed increase by 5 feet. And when we cast a spell with a range of touch, it has a casting time of an action, we can make that spell's range 10 feet instead of 5. So this is like Cure Wounds. This is relatively minor improvements, but it does mean you can kind of maybe kite if you're melee. I think this is rather a little disturbing to think about, like your limbs just stretch out and elongate both your arms and your legs. I don't think this is necessarily worth using every encounter and might not be worth a side dice, at least at this level, but it can be good if you have dice to spare, and the spacing is going to be important. All right, moving on to level 6, I put both the features on the screen here because they're relatively short. So we get extra attack, and it's like a Blade Singer extra attack or the Valor Bard. So we can attack twice instead of once whenever we take the attack action on our turn. And in addition, we can cast one of our Psion cantrips that has a casting time of an action in place of one of those attacks. Now, Psion only has 3 cantrips that deal damage. You've got True Strike, which you cannot use with your organic weapons because they don't have a value of a silver piece, or whatever the value of the spell is that's material component requires. You have Mind Sliver, which is probably the best one, and then you have the new Telekinetic Fling, which is okay. So as it is currently worded, you would have to make one attack with your organic weapon and then one attack with a different weapon or a cantrip. So again, you might want to wield a weapon with this subclass with the way that the organic weapons feature is currently worded. Now the next feature is called Quickened Healing. Whenever we cast Cure Wounds, we can expend 2 psionic energy dice to change the casting time to a bonus action, and if we do, we can roll one of those dice and add the numbered roll to the total amount of hit points restored. Now, this is a lot like the Swift Precognition Psionic Discipline out of the core class, but it's specific to this spell, Cure Wounds. One of the important things about the feature that it's competing with is the fact that that feature, the number of dice it costs is 1 plus the level that you cast the spell at. And on this feature, one of the things that means is even if we upcast Cure Wounds to a higher level, it's still only going to cost 2 dice to do it as a bonus action, which is a potential nice thing. And the new Cure Wounds spell does upcast really well now. All right, moving on to level 10, we get a feature called Mutable Form that improves Extend Limbs. So it increases the duration from 1 minute to 10 minutes, so it might potentially last multiple encounters. And then we get one of the following benefits of our choice. Stony Epidermis, Superior Stride, or Unnatural Flexibility. The first one gives us advantage on Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration, and then we can become resistant to an elemental damage type or bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. Superior Stride allows us to dash as a bonus action while we're not wearing armor, and we can climb and swim. And then Unnatural Flexibility is probably the one I think is the best. It gives us just a flat +2 bonus to AC, which is quite strong. And then we can squeeze through narrow gaps, which is rather disgusting. And we can also escape from restraints or end the grappled condition on us. One of the cool things here is that if we reactivate Extend Limbs, we can potentially swap the bonus, so your form can shift as you're in combat, so long as you have dice to use it, depending on what you need. And you can adapt the resistance from Stony Epidermis to what you might be facing in combat. So I think in terms of how good they are, Unnatural Flexibility would be first for me, then the Stony Epidermis, then Superior Stride. But I think they all have situations and good use cases. But the frequency with which you'll see those use cases varies. And finally, at level 14, we get the subclass Capstone, which is called Life Bending Weapons. So once per turn, note this is not once per our turn, but once per turn, when we hit a creature with our organic weapon, we can expend one psionic energy dice and roll it. Each creature of our choice, so basically only allies or us, and a 10-foot emanation originating from us, can regain hit points equal to the number we rolled plus our intelligence modifier. And additionally, one creature of our choice in the area takes necrotic damage equal to the number rolled. So this is another way to spend psi dice for a little extra damage and healing. However, this feature notably will work very well with the class Capstone at level 20, and potentially your Psionic Surge feature that you've had since level 7, which allows you to spend a hit dice to make anything that's a 1, 2, or a 3 on your psionic dice a 4. And the Capstone lets you spend up to 2 hit dice to roll 2 additional psi dice, basically. So you could potentially hit something for like 3d12 extra damage plus int at this level once per turn, at the cost of, 1 psi dice and a couple hit dice. And using the hit dice to heal yourself with this is probably going to be more efficient than using those hit dice to heal you otherwise. So a potentially good feature. It doesn't like blow my mind, but it is good, and it's something that will stack up value over time. And I think overall with this subclass, you're really looking at someone who wants to do some amount of healing and a little bit of weapon damage, but the squishiness of the base class does mean that, and that's going to be a high risk, not for I don't know how high of a reward kind of option. And I think your safest thing to do with this class is probably to sit back with your casters, use your Visceral Launcher organic weapon with a cantrip like Mind Sliver, and throw out the occasional healing and control spell and that kind of thing. All right, moving on to the Psi Warper, and this is the one that's supposed to be kind of more of the controller, and this is the one that probably caught my attention the most when I read through it the first time. So the description of this is warp space with the power of your mind. Psi Warpers tune their sonic powers to manipulating the space between objects. Capable of teleporting across the battlefield and creating vacuums in space, a Psi Warper is never in one place for too long. But yeah, I think this subclass, even though it's, again, designed to be a controller, I think it's going to be quite good at a lot of pillars of the game. So let's jump into the features of the Psi Warper. First up are their spells, their subclass spells. So I've highlighted all the ones on here that are overlapped with the core class. Half of their subclass list is on the core class list. That said, a lot of these spells are pretty good. Misty Step and Shatter. Blink is potentially nice. Haste is shared with another subclass, but Banishment and Dimension Door are both great spells. Teleportation Circle has nice utility. Steel Wind Strike is potentially good and thematic. I wouldn't say this list is necessarily as good as the Metamorphs, but it is still a decent list. Next, at level 3, we get Teleportation. So this is the Misty Step subclass for the Psion. So we can cast Misty Step without expending a spell slot once per long rest. However, we can also cast it basically by expending a psionic energy dice. No action required to get back our use of it. You may actually want to spend dice on this, especially when we get later features, because if we cast this spell without spending a spell slot, we could potentially still spend a spell slot to cast a spell with our action, which might be important later. And this subclass is going to be pretty heavy in use of your psionic energy dice. So if you want max output on this class, that'll vary pretty heavily depending on how long your adventuring day is and how many dice resources you actually have. All right, also at level 3, we get a feature called Warp Propel. This says when a target fails its saving throw against our Telekinetic Propel, which is our feature that we can push or pull somebody, instead of pushing it or pulling it, there's some wording here that needs updating, we can teleport the target to an unoccupied space that we can see within 30 feet of us that is horizontal to you. And this is yet again another feature that relies on using dice, because remember, Telekinetic Propel does use dice. However, horizontal to you, what this means is a plane that is parallel to the ground, is that the same height as you. So once you bring elevation in here, I saw the intent of this, and it's like the intent of this is supposed to keep you from dropping things on the ground. But once you're elevated, whether you're standing on a wall or in a watchtower or you're flying, the only space that you can legally put an enemy into with this is a space that is up in the air. So that means that, if I'm flying 30 feet above the ground, I can pick somebody up, teleport them to a square that is 30 feet, that is horizontal to me, which is 30 feet above the ground, and drop them for 3d6 bludgeoning damage and the prone condition if they failed their save. Now, if they don't want you to drop enemies with this, they just need to change that to you to horizontal to the target, and that way you won't be able to change the target's elevation. So I don't know if they intended you to be able to drop people with this, but again, once you get elevation, that's actually the only legal thing that you can do. It is pretty powerful if you can drop them, but again, it doesn't have to be if they want you to not do that. Moving on to level 6, we get Warp Space, and what this does is it enhances the Shatter spell, and what we're going to see with this class and a lot of the other subclasses is a lot of their subclass features are going to modify the way that you cast certain spells. So what this says, when we cast Shatter, we can expend 1 Psionic Energy Dice, yet another way to spend dice, to modify the spell so that the radius of the spell's sphere becomes 20 feet. Now it is 10 feet normally, so this is a quadrupling of the spell's effective area. In addition, creatures that fail the saving throw against the spell are pulled straight toward the center of the sphere, ending in an unoccupied space as close to the center of the sphere as possible. Now, this is actually something that's very worth spending a dice on. So here's the thing. If you center this sphere 20 feet above the ground, everyone that fails is going to get pulled 20 feet up and then drop, taking an additional 2d6 bludgeoning damage and falling prone. And this basically makes Shatter into a 4th level spell that, well, additionally it is kind of homebrew, but out of the Wild Mountain book, Gravity Sinkhole, that spell is very good. So I think this feature is very strong, and even though it's not included in the text, that, you know, you should probably center the sphere above the ground and pull enemies up and drop them. That is what you should be doing with this, and it is a good thing to spend dice on. Also at level 6, we get a feature called Teleporter Combat. And this says that immediately after we cast Misty Step, we can cast one of our Psion cantrips that has a cast and have an action as part of the bonus action. This is another great feature to get at this level. I would most likely be using this with Mind Sliver on this class. So if we cast Misty Step without a spell slot as our bonus action before doing anything else, we could fire off a Mind Sliver and then into a leveled control spell, which we could potentially enhance with a Psionic Discipline like Insinuation. In that case, we would subtract, you know, an energy dice and a d6, I believe, on Mind Sliver now from their saving throw, and potentially, you know, lock them down. So very powerful potentially. But again, this is burning through a lot of dice. If we've already used our free casting of Misty Step, it's going to be, you know, a dice to cast it without a spell slot, and then potentially more dice to fire off that leveled spell and that kind of thing. So powerful, but resource intensive, and resource management, I think, is going to be a big thing for a Psi Warper. Moving on to level 10, we get a feature called Duplicitous Target. So when a creature we can see makes an attack roll against us, we can take a reaction and expend a dice, so another feature that expends a dice, and we can choose a willing creature that we can see within 30 feet of ourselves that doesn't have the incapacitated condition, and then we swap places teleporting, and they become the target of the attack roll instead. So one of the things that you can potentially do with this, you can reposition advantageously. You can swap places with a higher armor class ally who's less likely to receive the hit. You could also potentially swap with a summoned creature or the party familiar and have them eat the hit instead of you. I think this feature is honestly quite good. However, that said, again, it does cost dice, which is a bit of a problem. Pretty much everything that this class is doing is going to be costing energy dice. So again, you're going to have to budget and decide whether it's worth it to use this versus something else that's going to use your dice. And finally, level 14, we get the subclass capstone called Mass Teleportation. So as a magic action, we can expend 4 psionic energy dice. That is a lot. I believe at this level, we would have 10 total, so that's 40% of our pool. And we can choose huge or smaller creatures within 30 feet of ourselves, equal to up to a number of creatures equal to our intelligence modifier. And each of those chosen creatures is teleported to an unoccupied space we can see within 150 feet. And an unwilling creature that succeeds on a wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC is unaffected. However, this effect is pretty crazy. Note that it says these squares don't have to be on the ground. So in theory, we could just teleport the targets 150 feet up, straight up into the air, and have them fall for 15d6 fall damage and the prone condition. If you're flying 30 feet above the ground or elevated, they could be 30 feet below you and you teleport them 150 feet above you, which is a 180 foot drop for 18d6. So the damage and control from this feature are quite good, and of course you can use it to reposition allies. But again, yeah, it doesn't say that you can't toss them straight up, so I see no reason why you couldn't. You could toss them, diagonally and, throw them off the edge of a cliff and fall and that kind of thing. So a lot of cool things that you can do with this. especially if you say, you know, set it up with a Mind Sliver before by using Teleporter Combat to cast, you know, your cantrip as part of the bonus action. And since this is a magic action and doesn't spend spell slots, we could, you know, use a spell slot on Misty Step to potentially, you know, make somebody fail this wisdom saving throw. So overall, I think the Psi Warper is very good, although a lot of the power of the subclass is hidden behind the fact that you want to be launching enemies into the air with this and using gravity. But again, it is a very dice-intensive subclass, more so than the Metamorph. I don't think the Metamorph will have much problem running out of dice, as opposed to this subclass will. Next up is the Psykinetic. This is the telekinetic one, supposed to be the blaster option, and they enhance attack mode. Now the flavor text here is mold psionic force for creation and destruction. A Psykinetic controls their psionic powers like a malleable force. They bend their telekinetic energies into sturdy barriers and strike with the force of a battering ram. So let's take a look at their spell list. So of the spells on this list, only 2, Telekinetic Crush and Telekinesis, are both on the core class list. And they have some really nice spells here on this list, including Cloud of Daggers for a persistent AoE damage effect that the class doesn't normally get. Levitate is great. Shield is great. I think Slow is great. Wall of Force is an amazing spell. All these are standouts. I think this is quite a good spell list. Next up, at level 3, we get a feature called Telekinetic Techniques. So when we use Telekinetic Propel, we can impose one of the following effects on the target. We can boost them to increase their speed by 10 feet. This will probably be if you use Telekinetic Propel on an ally. We have Disorient. The target can't make opportunity attacks until the start of its next turn. And Telekinetic Bolt. If the target fails the saving throw, it takes force damage equal to the number rolled on the psionic energy dice. What's weird here, and actually potentially quite strong, is that the chosen effect is applied regardless of whether or not the target passes their saving throw against this. And notably, you don't expend a dice when you use Telekinetic Propel if the target passes their saving throw. So one of the things you could do with this against an enemy is you could try to Telekinetic Propel them if they're within 5 feet of you. If they pass their save, you'd use Disorient. They can't make opportunity attacks against you. And if they fail, you push them away and they're too far away for them to make opportunity attacks against you. So I think this feature, being with that, it's a little weird. I think they should probably reword it so that it says when a target fails its saving throw against your Telekinetic Propel, you can impose one of the following effects on it. Otherwise, I think this is potentially a little too strong and a little too weird, given that it does something no matter what. But it could be fine the way it is. That was just something weird that I noticed with this feature. And that's all they get at level 3. Moving on to level 6, they get Empowered Attack Mode. So what this does is while Attack Mode is active, we gain a fly speed of 60 feet and can hover. And whenever we cast a Psion spell, we can add our Intelligence modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. Getting a fly speed is amazing at this level, and it works to potentially pull and drop enemies with Telekinetic Propel. Remember, we can pull them straight toward us, and if we're up in the air, straight toward us, we'll give them elevation and they will fall. And the damage enhancement is nice, especially if you have area of effect spells that only have 1 damage roll. Attack mode has its own charges. Importantly, you have 2 per long rest at this level, although notably next level we will get a way to get them back from the core class. At level 7, you can spend a hit dice when you roll initiative to regain an expended use of attack mode. So you probably want to be using attack mode almost all the time with this subclass when you can, which means that feature at level 7 is quite good for this subclass. Also at level 6, we get Rebounding Field. So when we cast Shield in response to being hit by an attack roll and cause the triggering attack, specifically that one, to miss, we can expend 1 psionic energy dice to launch the force back at the attacker. They make a dex save, then we roll 2 dice, and on a failed save, they take force damage equal to the amount rolled, and we gain that many temporary hit points. And on a successful save, they just take half as much of the damage. So we actually got both an offensive and a defensive boost here at level 6. I think they're both good, and I think Rebounding Field is probably worth a dice, particularly because it gives us those temporary hit points as well. And with Psionic Surge that we get next level also, that'll be a potential minimum of 8 hit points and damage if we want to use the feature to make those dice a minimum of 4. At level 10, we get Enhanced Telekinetic Crush. So this is another feature that enhances a subclass spell. So when we cast Telekinetic Crush, we can expend 1 energy dice to modify the spell so that whether a creature fails or succeeds its saving throw against the spell, their speed is halved until the start of our next turn. So notably, this spell does 5d8 force damage. It's a 3rd level spell, and it knocks the targets prone if they fail. And this will make it even harder for them to leave the area. And this spell is potentially good combo setup with another character or some other kind of persistent AoE effect spell, because you can basically trap them in the area. This one is decent. I'm not super sold on it because Telekinetic Crush is kind of meh, but I think this is potentially a strong feature. But it's not as insane to me as some of their other stuff this subclass gets. And finally, at level 14, we get Heightened Telekinesis. So when we cast Telekinesis, which is a 5th level spell, we can expend 4, which is pretty hefty, Psionic Energy Dice to modify the spell so that it doesn't require concentration, which is nice. And if we do, the duration drops to a minute, but we can target gargantuan creatures and objects, which means we can potentially target anything in the game. Now, this thing that I don't like about Telekinesis is that it requires an action every round to keep doing it. However, this is a potentially powerful control effect. This might be good if you combo it with another concentration spell that you set up first. But that said, this is very expensive and does take a decent amount of setup, but it is a potential strong combo-oriented piece. Overall, I think the Psykinetic is interesting. I don't think they necessarily capture my attention as much as the Psi Warper, but I think they could be a good subclass, especially considering they get a banger spell list and which solves some of the core class's defensive problems because they have, the shield spell for one. All right, finally, the Telepath, who is supposed to master tactics in the landscape of the mind. Telepaths are masters of mind magic. They use their psionic powers for all matters of the mind, whether they bolster the mental defenses of allies or probe the thoughts of others undetected. A telepath can be a bastion of psionic aid or a crafty manipulator. This one is supposed to be kind of the support subclass, but in my opinion, they actually have a lot of pretty sneaky power. They're actually very good at securing saves across the party as well as providing control. So let's go ahead and dive into their features. So first up, their spell list, and they have a 70% overlap with the core class spell list, which is kind of a bummer. Some of the spells on here, though, Bane is a potentially good spell. I think Command is a great spell. Counterspell, notably, is a great spell to have, and they're the only subclass among the signs that has this. The Confusion is a decent spell, especially with the way that the subclass will literally be able to modify it. But I don't think Awaken or Modify Memory are very good, although they are thematic for this subclass. Next at level 3, we get Mind Infiltrator. So when we cast Detect Thoughts, we can expend 2 Psionic Energy Dice, which is half our pool at this point, to modify the spell so that it doesn't require spell components or concentration, and the target doesn't know if we're probing its mind if it fails the Wisdom saving throw. This is a potentially nice out-of-combat feature. It's a bit expensive, but I don't think it has a huge amount of application in combat, but it could be an interesting spell, and it definitely is thematic for this kind of character. Next up, level 3, we get Telepathic Hub. So this gives us telepathy out to a range of 10 feet. Remember, our base class gives us telepathy with a range of 5 feet already. And when we expend a Psionic Energy Dice as part of using our telepathic connection to increase the range of our telepathy, so this is our other bonus action thing that we could do from level 1. For the duration of the effect, we can simultaneously contact a number of creatures equal to 1 plus the number rolled on the Psionic Energy Dice, so a minimum of 2. Now, at this level, this is basically mostly a utility thing and expands the range of our already short-range telepathy. Connecting is nice, but that said, this feature is required for the level 6 features of this class. And in my opinion, the base class telepathic connection is weak, specifically because of how this subclass works. I would be in favor of changing the way that this subclass works to make that feature less clunky. But that said, I understand kind of why it's like how it is, and we'll see once we get to level 6. Speaking of level 6, we get 2 things here, Empowered Defense Mode and Potent Thoughts. Potent Thoughts is pretty simple. We just add our Intelligence modifier to the damage we deal with any Psion cantrip, which is a nice little damage bump for a subclass like this. But the big one here is Empowered Defense Mode. So while our Defense Mode is active, whenever we make a save, we add 1d4 to the save automatically. And remember, we can already add an Energy Dice to our save while Defense Mode is active. In addition, while we have Defense Mode active, we can extend this benefit, so the 1d4 to saves, to the creatures we are telepathically connected to with using our telepathic connection, which was our level 3 feature. So here's the payoff. This is a lot like a Paladin's Aura of Protection with a significantly longer range. At next level, once we have Psionic Surge, we can guarantee the range of this Empowered Defense Mode is at least 50 feet, and also due to Psionic Surge, we should always have a charge to potentially use Defense Mode. This does take a couple of bonus actions to set up, but I think we can probably reasonably pre-activate the kind of telepathic hub ability out of combat because it has a pretty long duration, and if we know that we're going to go into combat, it's reasonable to have that up. So even though it does take 2 bonus actions, I don't think most of the time you'll actually need to take 2. I think you'll just be able to fire off defense mode in the first round, and you should be good. Alternatively, you fire off defense mode round 1 and then connect to your allies in round 2. Moving on to level 10, we get telepathic bolstering, which gives us telepathy to a range of 30 feet. This helps with hub and empowered defense mode. At this level, our minimum range of empowered defense mode to help our allies would be 70 feet. And when we roll, whenever ourselves or a creature within range of our telepathy fails an ability check or misses with an attack roll, we can take a reaction and expend a psionic energy dice, roll the dice, and add the number rolled to the d20, potentially turning that failed check into a success or a miss into a hit. And the energy dice is only expended if the check succeeds or the attack hits. This is kind of like reaction bardic inspiration. I think that this is decently good. However, you do have some pressure on your reaction. If you use this, for example, you can't boost your own saves with defense mode, at least with the energy dice. Finally, at level 14, this subclass gets Scramble Minds. So when we cast Confusion, we can expend 4 dice, again, rather expensive, to modify this spell so the radius of the spell sphere becomes 30 feet. This is tripling the radius, a 9x increase to the area. The base radius is 10 feet, notably. In addition, creatures under the effect of the spell roll 2d10s, and we choose which roll determines their behavior on the turn. So here are what Confusion does. Notably, on a 9 to 10, the spell lets the creature choose what it does. So when they're rolling 2d10s and we pick one, this essentially becomes much more like mind control. We have a lot more control over what they're going to do, and their odds of actually having a normal turn drop from 20% to 4%. This does make the Confusion spell much better, although the dice cost is pretty steep. This spell, most enemies notably are not immune to this, so this potentially is a very strong control option for this subclass. I think, overall, this subclass is really invested in that empowered defense mode, and a lot of the features are utility or control-based otherwise, but with the power of the core class, I think a Telepath Psion would be a flexible and powerful character, and could be more powerful than meets the eye just because of how powerful boosting everyone's saves is. All right, so to summarize, overall, I really like all of the subclasses that they presented for the Psion in this Unearthed Arcana. I think each subclass looks like it will play very differently, and there may be a variety of playstyles you could do within the same subclass, although I don't think there's a huge amount there. I do think that some of the wording definitely needs to be cleaned up. I think organic weapons needs to be cleaned up so you can attack more than once with an organic weapon on your turn. That means that like level 6 would be a lot cleaner. I'm not sure if telekinetic techniques out of the Psykinetic is supposed to work the way it is, where it always applies an effect. And again, with the horizontal warping with the Psi Warper, if this is, again, horizontal to the target instead of horizontal to you, that will keep you from dropping them if that's something they wanted to do. I feel like that should be confirmed, whether or not dropping people with that is intended. Next, running out of Psi dice. So many of the subclass abilities are quite powerful, but without exception, pretty much all of the powerful abilities are fueled by Psi dice. And even though you get a lot of Psi dice, they're in very high demand given the subclass and the class usage options. I wouldn't be surprised if most Psions, barring the Metamorph, run out of Psi dice pretty quickly if you're not careful. This is more so an observation and not a complaint. I think having a powerful class that needs to budget its resources is a good thing. We've seen this with Sorcerer, who, again, I think this class is the most comparable to. But yeah, just with all your features costing dice, you'll need to be careful with them. Even though you have decent recharge features, you don't have infinite Psi dice. The other thing was, as we saw with some of the subclasses, there's a decent amount of subclass and core class spell overlaps. I would personally like to see less of this. Either change the spells for the worst offenders or consider removing some of those spells from the core class list. Of course, you don't have to take options that don't fit the fantasy of your character, but I feel like this could help further strengthen the fantasy of a given character. One of the things that I noticed with the core class list, again, is a lot of those spells kind of capture things that these subclasses are supposed to do. So even though, the Telepath is supposed to be the mind powers guy, you could take things like Rowletham's Psychic Glance and Synaptic Static on Tasha's Mind Whip on the Psi Warper, and you could still have a very effective Mind Warrior type character. So I'm not sure, personally I like that, but you know, I do think specializing the spells out a little bit, reducing the overlap, would make the subclasses feel better and more unique, especially ones that are like 70% of your spell list is shared with the core class. All right, so thanks for watching. Again, overall, I really like the subclasses actually a lot better than the core class, but together I think they actually form something that's pretty compelling. I think with some cleaned up wording and minor tweaks, I think the classes and the subclasses would honestly be okay to print. But hey, what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and additionally, the survey for the Psion and the UA is open, has been open as of June 3rd. I will be posting a link to that in the description of this video. So if you want to, you know, leave your feedback for Wizards of the Coast, please check that out and do that. And the next video is going to be on the rest of this Unearthed Arcana, so the updated spells and the wild talent feats, which are like origin feats. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.